Why does my son cry every time we drive past that empty lot? I wasn't ready to know there is a corner in our city, at the intersection of 6th and Elm, that doesn't exist. To you, it would be a patch of urban blight, a vacant lot fenced, off with chain link, littered with weeds and the ghosts of wind-blown trash. It's a gap in the cityscape, a missing tooth in the smile of the skyline. To me, it was just a shortcut, a way to shave 3 minutes off my commute. But to my son, Leo, it was a place of profound and inexplicable sorrow. And for the longest time, I had no idea why our life was built on the solid foundations of the predictable. I'm Mark, a contractor. I spend my days turning blueprints into tangible structures of concrete and steel. I believe in load-bearing walls, in level floors, in the immutable laws of physics. My wife, Chloe, is a painter. She finds meaning in chaos, beauty in abstraction. We were a perfect balance of the concrete and the ethereal. Our son, Leo, was supposed to be the bridge between our worlds. At 4 years old, he was a vibrant, laughing force of nature, all boundless energy and scraped knees. He was a happy child, except when we drove past the corner of 6th and Elm. It happened without fail. We'd be driving, singing along to some cartoon-themed song, and as we approached the intersection, a change would come over him. His laughter would die in his throat. His small body would tense in his car seat. And as the empty lot slid into view, his face would crumple, and a sound would escape him, a deep, wrenching sob that seemed too large for his small body. It wasn't the tantrum of a child wanting a toy. It was the sound of genuine, heart-rending grief. "What's wrong, buddy?" I'd ask, my eyes flicking from the road to his tear-streaked face in the rearview mirror. He could never answer. He'd just shake his head, his tiny fists clenched, and cry until the lot was a block behind us. Then, as if a switch was flipped, he would sniffle, wipe his eyes, and ask for a snack. The whole harrowing episode seemingly forgotten. Chloe, with her artist's intuition, felt the wrongness of it immediately. "It's that place, Mark," she'd say, her voice hushed. Something about that place hurts him. I'd dismiss it, of course. It's a phase. Maybe the sun gets in his eyes at that corner. Maybe he dislikes the color of the fence. I had a dozen rational explanations, because the alternative was unthinkable. I build things that are meant to stand. The idea that my son was being haunted by a patch of empty dirt was a concept my mind refused to construct. The strange behaviors weren't confined to the car. We noticed other things, small dissonances in his otherwise normal childhood. He had an obsession with the clanging bell of the old-fashioned trolley that ran on the tourist line downtown. He was terrified of sirens, not just the noise, but the very idea of them. He'd cover his ears and hide, his face pale with the fear that went beyond a simple dislike of loud sounds. He also had an imaginary friend, but his wasn't a superhero or an animal. It was a man he called Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson is tired today," he'd say. "His legs hurt." Or, "Mr. Henderson says the sugar delivery is late again." It was all strangely specific, mundane, and adult. We treated it as a quirk, another story to tell our friends about our creative, unusual son. We were so busy explaining it, we never stopped to listen. The moment that explanation ceased to be enough happened on a sweltering August afternoon. We were stuck in traffic, the car idling directly beside the empty lot. The sun beat down on the asphalt. Leo had been quiet, but I could see his knuckles turning white in the rearview mirror. The crying started, low and mournful at first. My patience, worn thin by the heat and the traffic, finally snapped. "Leo, that's enough," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "It is an empty lot. There is nothing there. Tell me what is wrong." My anger shocked him into silence. He stared at me, his blue eyes shimmering with tears. He raised a trembling finger and pointed at the field of weeds and broken concrete. His voice was a choked whisper, a string of words that rearranged my world. "It's all gone," he wept. "My store. He burned my store. All the candies are melted. Mrs. Gable can't get her bread." I stared at him. The cars behind me started honking. The light had turned green, but I couldn't move. My blood ran cold in the stifling heat. My store. The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my mind. It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a phase. It was a memory. That night, our house felt different. The comfortable silence was replaced by a tense, questioning quiet. Chloe had written down the words he'd said on a notepad as if they were evidence in a crime. "Mrs. Gable, candies, my store," she read, her voice trembling. "Mark, what does it mean?" "It means he has a wild imagination," I insisted, the words tasting like lies. "He's piecing together things he's seen on TV, stories he's heard." But even as I said it, I pictured his face, the raw, undiluted grief. Imagination didn't look like that. Leo began to talk about the store constantly. He would describe it with a clarity that was impossible. He spoke of the heavy oak counter, worn smooth in the middle from years of use. He described the smell of sawdust on the floor and pipe tobacco. He talked about the big, brass cash register and the satisfying ding it made when the drawer flew open. He mentioned people by name. A delivery boy named Jimmy, who had a bright red bicycle. A little girl named Sarah, who always came in for a penny candy and never had the penny. He spoke of it all with a fond, wistful nostalgia of an old man looking back on his life's work. And he spoke of Mr. Henderson not as a friend, but as himself. "My back always hurt after stocking the high shelves," he'd say, rubbing his own 4-year-old back. "I used to give Jimmy an extra soda on hot days." This strain between Chloe and me grew. She wanted to explore it. I wanted to ignore it, to protect our son and myself from the terrifying implications. To prove her wrong, I did what any man of logic would do. I sought out facts. I went to the city planning department's online portal and looked up the parcel of land at 6th and Elm. The records were disappointingly modern. It was zoned for commercial use, owned by a development corporation. The last few transactions were all between faceless LLCs. There was no mention of a store, no Henderson. No clues at all. I felt a wave of relief. It was nothing. A story. The truth came from Chloe's father. He'd lived in the city for all of his 70 years, a walking encyclopedia of local history. During a family dinner, Chloe, ignoring my warning glare, cautiously brought it up. "Dad," she began, "do you remember what used to be on the corner of 6th and Elm? A long time ago?" He looked up from his meal, his eyes distant for a moment. 6th and Elm? Sure. For years, that was the Henderson block. There was a big mercantile there. Henderson's. Best darn shop in the city. Old man Henderson ran it. Kindest fellow you'd ever meet. I felt a fork slip from my grasp, clattering onto my plate. What happened to it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Chloe's father's face grew somber. Ah, that was a tragedy. A terrible fire. Must have been back in the late 50s. Burned the whole thing to the ground. Old man Henderson ... He lived upstairs. He didn't make it out. The air left my lungs. The casual dinner table conversation had just put a name and a date to my sons. Nightmares. Old man Henderson. Mr. Henderson. My store. There was no more denying it. My need to disprove the fantasy was replaced by a desperate, terrifying need to know everything. The next day, Chloe and I went to the downtown public library, to the local history department in the basement. The air smelled of dust and decaying. Paper. We sat at a clunky microfiche machine, the hum of the fan filling the silence as I spooled through decades-old newspapers. We scrolled through the news of 1958, Eisenhower speeches, the rise of rock and roll, and then we found it. A headline from a cold February morning, stark and black, Inferno on Elm Street claims beloved shopkeeper. The article was a grainy portrait of a tragedy. The fire had started from faulty wiring in the basement, spreading with terrifying speed. It described the valiant efforts of the fire department, their sirens cutting through the night, the same sound that terrified my son. It described the complete destruction of Henderson's Mercantile, a pillar of the community for over 40 years. I read the words, and my son's memories played out in my head. The article mentioned distraught neighbors, including a Mrs. Gable, who said she bought her bread there every morning. It mentioned the owner, Arthur Henderson, a 68-year-old widower, known for his generosity, especially to the neighborhood children. And then came the final, soul-crushing paragraph. I read it aloud, my voice a dry rasp. According to fire officials, Mr. Henderson had escaped the initial blaze, but was seen re-entering the burning structure. It is believed he went back for his cat, Patches. Neither was seen again. I leaned back in the chair, the world tilting on its axis. Beside the article was a photograph. A grainy, black and white image of a man with kind, crinkling eyes and a gentle smile, standing proudly behind a long wooden counter. The caption read, Arthur Henderson, in his store, 1955, Mr. Henderson, the man whose aching legs my son complained about, the man whose grief my son felt every time we drove past the tomb of his life's work. My son wasn't being haunted by a ghost. The ghost was inside him. The world is different now. I still build houses. I still put my faith in concrete and steel. But I know now that they are temporary. I know there are things that are far more permanent, things that can't be measured with a level or a blueprint. The foundations of my own life have been raised and rebuilt. When I look at my son, I see a miracle and a tragedy intertwined. I see a child learning to ride a bike, and an old man who remembers the weight of a lifetime. Chloe and I never told Leo what we found. What could we say? How do you tell a 5-year-old that he has already lived and died? How do you explain that his deepest, darkest fears are not fears at all, but memories? We still drive past the corner of 6th and Elm. We have to. It's on the way to his school. But something has changed. He doesn't cry anymore. The first time we passed it after our visit to the library, he was quiet. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him staring at the empty lot, a profound sadness in his eyes, but no tears. He saw me looking, and a small, faint smile touched his lips. It was a smile of acceptance, of peace. It was the smile of an old man who had finally made peace with his own grave. Sometimes he'll say things that stop my heart. The other day, he found a stray cat in our yard and insisted we feed it, stroking its back gently. Everyone deserves to be safe, he said, looking up at me with Arthur Henderson's kind eyes. I love my son with a depth that terrifies me. But my love is now tinged with a strange and constant sense of awe and sorrow. Am I raising a child? Or am I simply providing a temporary home for a gentle soul on a much longer journey? I look at his small hands, hands that are meant to build with blocks, and hold mine tightly, and I can't help but wonder what they remember of a past I can never. No, I am a builder who has been shown that some structures are invisible, and that the most important lives are the ones we can't see. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that I am not just raising my son. I am the caretaker of a memory, a guardian of a ghost, until he is ready to move on.